Hey everybody, it's Alec here, back at it with another episode of the Smashing Brands podcast. Today I am joined by
Aleta Maxwell here.
Aleta. Thank you so much for being on the show. Excited to have you and have an awesome conversation.
Thanks so much for having me today.
My pleasure. So the first question I always like to ask is, how do you spend your time on planet Earth?
Hmm. I have a 17, well, now 18-year-old son. So the past 15 years has been spending a lot of time at basketball, watching basketball, driving to basketball, everything basketball oriented. So that has been a pretty big part of my life. The other part of my life, professionally, I've been really focusing on developing leadership skills, being able to give time and attention to executives, leadership, to kind of hone in on how they could be the best leader on a daily basis.
So what does that require? If we were to start with like the top three things, you're in an elevator with somebody for a minute. You're going from the first floor to the 70th floor. Let's call it the Empire State Building because you're from New York.
Yeah,
What do you tell them?
I think it has to do with a couple things: reflection, intention, and awareness. What type of leader do you want to be? How do you remind yourself on a daily basis that you want to be this leader? And how do you give yourself space to reflect on that and to constantly be pushing your own development in that area?
Yeah, I love that. And I definitely want to touch on that a little bit later in this conversation. But first of all, what you do is, as a coach, it's kind of a niche profession. How did you get into it?
Well, I kind of came up through the hospitality industry. In 2007, when I had my son, I pivoted to HR. I spent about 6 years in nonprofits in the HR space. Then I kind of rejoined hospitality again. There were two brothers from the Bay Area that had started a burrito company here in New York City. They had 3 locations. Their goal was to continue to make the culture just kind of best in class and grow it to ultimately sell it. And so that's what we
Yeah.
did. I spent about 8 years with them, building from 3 locations to 22 locations, ended up selling the business at the beginning of 2020. That allowed me to pivot, write a best-selling book, develop some online courses, and start executive coaching. What I saw at my time at Dos Toros was whether it was leaders in our company or other leaders that we were interacting with in different companies, most got into leadership because they were really good at this thing. They didn't necessarily spend a lot of time building out their leadership style, building out their leadership development. Most leaders can really utilize reflection and intention in their leadership. The best leaders I have seen actually carve out time in their schedule for this, and it really is felt by the rest of the team and the culture.
Yeah, so what does that look like carving out time in the schedule?
Yeah, so I typically meet with my clients every 2 weeks. We have a 1 hour session. I'm very goal oriented. So I'm very mindful of what their goals are and moving them along. I love to give homework, if you will. And that causes them to then spend additional time outside of our sessions reflecting and being super mindful to focus on our goals to develop their specific qualities that they want to focus on.
Yeah, so what do you feel like is something, whether a leader or an executive, what are some things that maybe they're putting too much focus on that maybe they shouldn't, but also other things that they're overlooking?
Mm. I think sometimes what I'm hearing from a lot of different people, especially in the middle level management role, is that there's meetings for meetings for meetings. That we meet to talk about the meeting we're going to have, and then we meet to discuss the meeting we just had. So, this sense of not having any clear goal or reason for why we're meeting, being specific as to what we want to get out of that, having communication kind of check ins to make sure that this strategy works for everybody, and again, for the leader to be very, very explicit as to the why. Why are we meeting? Why are we meeting so much or not as much? Making sure that everybody rallies around the same common goals, I find to be really, really useful. So people don't feel like they're meeting to meet to meet.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Who do you like? What kind of companies do you like working with most? It's like, how long have you been doing this, by the way?
About 5 years.
About 5 years. So in that time, like, let's say it's like, let's say it's 5 years ago, right when you started, or you could give yourself a piece of advice 5 years, 5 years ago,
Mm.
from 5 years ago. Like, what would you tell yourself now?
I think, 5 years ago, I was really about helping everybody, whoever I could
Yeah.
help, I wanted to help. I've realized that I need to be a little bit more specific as to who I want to help. Really, what matters the most is working with individuals that want to improve. I've unfortunately been part of a couple different engagements where the leadership team was told they were going to be coached. And what I find is that if there's not that buy in, you're not going to really
Hmm.
see the value. It's just kind of like with therapy. If somebody doesn't want to go to therapy, they can go to therapy for years, but not see any improvement. The same thing with
Yeah.
coaching. If somebody doesn't want to open up, if somebody doesn't want to take a hard look as to how they're showing up on a daily basis and how they can improve, then there's really not going to be any improvement or value there. And so now I'm a little bit more picky, making sure that I am working with individuals that really want to improve and want to do this inner work.
Yeah, and like, what is your like sales process when you're doing that? Like to make sure you're working with the right kinds of people.
I think now, prior to this kind of thought process, I was only working with the senior leader, let's say if they wanted to get coaching for their entire leadership team. I was only
Mm,
talking to the senior leader, I was only hearing their concerns. And now I'm very, very clear that I need to talk to each individual and make sure each individual is going to be dedicated and interested in the work that we're
mm,
going to do together.
nice. How long did it take you to learn that?
A good 2 years. 2 years of banging my head against a brick wall when I couldn't see any improvement or I didn't feel like my clients were getting that value. Is when I realized, okay, we have to come about this a different way.
Yeah, and like, where does that like level of, let's say, self-awareness to make those kind of changes come from? Like, have you had coaches that you've hired for yourself over the last several years?
Yeah, so I started working with a coach in 2017, back when I was Chief Human Resource Officer of Dos Toros. I realized that we were going to meet our end goal at some point. So I started working with a coach to figure out what did I want to do next. And she was so, and still is, so very, very helpful in um, facilitating a different perspective, causing me to start questioning some of the narratives that I have running in my brain and be very, very clear as to what I wanted. I've continued to work with her. And when I started my own business, I also brought on board a business coach to help me get really, really specific and hold me accountable to the steps I wanted to take to grow my business. So I have two different coaches. And what I've seen is that the majority of great leaders also have multiple people on their team to help them be the best leader on each and every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you feel like are some of those like key strategies that like you've worked on like with your business coach, for example, that's helped you grow your business?
Well, being very clear as to what my end goals are, being very clear as to the whys, and having an action plan that I am committed to and will follow consistently. Every single day, there are things that I do to grow my business, and I'm very mindful as to how I spend my time. I'm somebody who believes in working smarter, not harder. So I want to make sure that I am not spending 14, 15 hours driving my business, that I'm very specific with the time that I spend and the whys behind it.
Well, let's talk about it.
Sure
What are you doing?
thing.
Like, what
I'm
does
really
a yeah?
active. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, what does a day in the life look like between like balancing, your family life, client work, business development, all of that?
Yeah, I typically meet with clients between 10 and 4 every day. I'm typically doing at least an hour of LinkedIn work in the morning, making connection requests, making sure that I'm active on other people's posts and understanding what's going on in the world, and then making sure that I have my own thought pieces out there on what I'm seeing and responding to. That's a pretty important part of driving my business.
Yeah, let's dive into like the marketing strategy specifically. Like, what have been like the key drivers for you that have helped you land more clients?
Well, I learned a lot of things the hard way. I spent a lot of money at first, having a lot of different companies help me. And I realized that if my message is not super authentic and genuine, it is
Mm.
not going to land. And so, making sure that I am part of and personally crafting the messages, making sure that it is um, genuine to me and super authentic, allows me not to feel really crunchy about sales, allows me to instead offer up my services to those that I can help rather than feeling I'm pushing or selling, if you will.
Yeah, so like what does that look like? Like how like we talk about authenticity, it's so important. Like what has that look like for you now versus like when you were started and just like learning to figure out what your voice was?
Yeah, I think I was much more open when I started out going with the templates or the prescribed messages that I was given. I realized that I really had to take all of those and revamp them, utilize my own words, be really, really specific as to the pain points that I wanted to help and how I can help clients. So, again, at first, I think I was just a little bit trusting. If you're in marketing, you know what you're doing, we'll use your script kind of thing. And now I just realize that it's my business and it's my voice, and I need to make sure that every word that I utilize resonates.
What do you feel like the part of your message, whether it's your value proposition, your story, all of that, what do you feel like has resonated most with people, at least recently?
I think a lot of leaders are feeling isolated and put a lot of pressure on themselves to figure out the problems, figure out the solutions, and then tell people what to do. And what I found is that a lot are resonating with the fact that the healthiest leaders, the ones that have had the most success, are actually not isolating themselves. They're actually really, really good at sharing their thoughts about problems, getting people's input, really crafting solutions with their teams, utilizing their team's expertise, and making sure there's a ton of buy-in before they jump off that cliff and try something new. And I find that, again, those leaders that are comfortable enough, that are not ego driven, but really goal driven, that are the ones that are very mindful as to how they're showing up each and every day and present with their team, those are the ones that are most successful and are generally at ease with their leadership.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So like What what do you think determines whether it's nature or nurture regarding like people that are more goal driven versus people that are more ego driven? Because I know expect you work with a lot of people in corporate. Like there's a lot of ego in play. I've had some corporate clients. I try to honestly not work with as many as big companies because there's just so many politics, there's all of that kind of stuff. Or when you're working with smaller teams or entrepreneurs directly, there's that humility not all the time, but I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective, like, why are people the way that they are?
I find that a lot of people are the way that they are because they're going at it as to what do I want to accomplish, not necessarily how do I want others to feel. I find
Mm,
when I can get a leader to really be thoughtful as to how do I want my team to feel? How do I want the person I'm speaking with to feel? The ego kind of subsides a bit. And they're really thoughtful and careful with the way that they express they want others to feel. When I can get a leader to keep that top of mind, it seems that they don't just respond to scenarios based off of emotion, but rather they're reacting intentionally. And they tend to feel a lot better about how they react intentionally rather than just respond.
yeah, and on top of that, it's I had a great follow-up question. What was I going to ask in regards to this? What is right? Because a lot of people might think of, hey, the way I'm doing this is fine, even if it is ego driven, whatever. But it's like when we're a more compassionate leader, we're going to have a bigger impact. But how do you really like have that ROI conversation with them? Like, hey, if you change this leadership style, this is going to be the outcome. And what does that conversation even look like?
Well, I tend to point to some stats, right? So we know from the data that something like 79% of people quit their boss, not the company. They don't
Mm,
get disillusioned with the brand or with the work necessarily. They just don't want to continue to report to their manager. So we know that leadership impacts the bottom line, right? Because an entry level employee, a turnover of one team member can be about $2,500, and it only goes up from there to the
Yeah.
management and senior level. So every single time that we have turnover based upon our leadership style, we are throwing money away. Eventually, that
Mm.
does erode culture. And I've never met a business owner that said that they wanted a culture that was toxic. Every business owner wants a really, really healthy, robust culture. And there's certain
Yeah.
things that we can point to historically that bring that about and continue that on. And one of the ways is how we show up and we speak to each other. When we can do that with respect, when we can do that with clarity, when we can be very, very clear with how we want things to go, our expectations, and resetting those. And when we get comfortable with some of those uncomfortable conversations, that's when you see a thriving culture.
Yeah. And what do you feel like is the most like compelling stat that people are like, oh, I need to make a shift?
Usually I look at their turnover numbers. Their
Yeah.
retention and turnover numbers typically tell me a story. And typically people do not equate that to money. They just look at those as numbers. They look at the industry average. If we're around there, we're probably fine. Typically, when I draw out and I create that story based off those numbers, they realize that they're not in the position they want to be in. They're not in a position of strength. They're in a position of weakness because they're losing their best team members based off of something that they control. We control how we react to others. We control how we show up. We control the energy that we bring to any situation. And once leaders start to understand that and be intentional with that, they start to see a change in how people are reacting and responding to them.
Yeah. So you have a lot of really wise words. Like, where does the wisdom come from? Like, was there something in your journey, whether it's personal, professional, probably both, that just had you kind of force you to reevaluate your life and pursue some of these other ways of thinking to better get to, where you want to be?
Yeah, I'm a huge sports fan. I grew up in the Jordan era. I was a competitive swimmer. I used to change practice around for the Chicago Bulls games. I was a huge fan and still am of Phil Jackson. His leadership style, especially back then when you had the Bobby Knights of the world, was so different and so intentional. And that's when I started to realize that there's a difference in leaders. There's a difference in how we can show up as a leader. I then started seeing that there's not enough crossover, if you will, of sports and profession. So feedback, for example, if you look at the sports world's all about feedback. If you're an athlete, you're getting feedback from 18 million different sources. In the
Hmm.
professional world, there's a lot of people that are only getting feedback twice a year. And that
Mm.
feedback is typically kind of a kitchen sink feedback conversation, if you will, where I'm going to throw everything at you that you've done wrong in the last 6 months and hope and
Yeah.
pray that you're going to get better and that we can have a great relationship.
Yeah.
And so I started seeing a lot of these crossovers, and that's what made me really interested to get into coaching, because a lot of these things people very much agree with. People see that there's logic behind it. They're not just practicing it on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, like, how many similarities there are between the feedback thing is interesting. I never thought about that because it's like, yeah, if you're playing basketball, you're getting feedback after every single game, every single moment, all of that. And yeah, in business, like, you're not getting feedback unless you're openly asking for it. While in sports, it just happens,
Yeah, the
right?
best cultures are the ones that create a constant feedback cycle where everybody's constantly getting feedback, both positive and
Yeah.
critical, and they're constantly giving positive and critical to their leaders. And that is, if you look at the most sustainable high performance cultures, the feedback is constant and critical. And if you look at the cultures that are a little bit more toxic, it's very cringy to give feedback. It's typically critical and it's typically loud in the way that they're given feedback, and it doesn't inspire or motivate.
Yeah. What what percentage, I know this is like almost impossible to answer, but out of like let's say the the Fortune 500 companies, or even like top 1,000 companies, like how many do you think have strong cultures where there's a lot of feedback versus cultures that are lacking?
Well, there was a book called The Culture Code that kind of dug into this. The
Hmm.
author really looked at the top companies, whether it's Fortune 500 or sports entities, that have been able to sustain success over long periods of time. And there was a very clear line through those. The companies that were sustainable in their success were very, very big on making sure that feedback was just part of the conversation at all times, that senior leaders were always getting feedback from all sides. The junior individuals, the entry-level individuals were given feedback constantly so they could tweak their performance just like an athlete.
Do you feel like what you're learning in business and coaching other people, you're also kind of like transferring to your personal life as well?
Oh
Like
yeah,
whether with
I
your
sure hope
friends or your
so.
son? Yeah, and like what would that look like? Or what does that look like?
Well, it's funny because during COVID, my son was at home, like most children were, and I was doing a lot of um, online courses. I was filming all my online courses during that point in time. And he will utilize my words back at me at certain points. I was doing a whole Enneagram assessment where I was being clear as to what my healthy and unhealthy traits were. And he's really great at throwing that back at me when I am experiencing some unhealthy moments. So my hope is that, yeah, I can
Nice.
utilize all my learning for myself, my son, my friends. I'm very careful not to coach others unless they want to be coached in the moment. I'm sure I
Yeah.
slip and slide on that sometimes, but yeah, my hope is that just like my friends and their specialty, I'm hoping to constantly be learning from them, and I hope that I can provide some insights as well.
Yeah, what on that topic of Enneagram, like what are your favorite like tests? Like Enneagram's obviously one. There's I like Myers-Briggs a lot personally. Have you taken the Myers-Briggs?
Yeah, that could be very helpful, I find. I'm all of my clients go through the Enneagram one because I just think I've never had a person take the Enneagram assessment and say that it does not resonate with them. Every person I've
Yeah.
ever had take it was like, oh my gosh, this is me. And what I love about it is it just clearly lays out our motivations and needs and the healthy and unhealthy factors that can come into play. And I know for me, when I first took it about 10 years ago, it was really eye-opening because I was like, oh, I do this unhealthy behavior. Man, I was not aware that that was why I was acting like this. And once I was aware of it, I could start catching myself in those unhealthy moments. And I think that's what it's about, right? None of us are perfect. We're all human. We're all messy. We're going to have those unhealthy moments. It's about catching
Yeah.
ourselves and kind of being a choice to change how we're acting in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna guess you're an ENFJ. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
I can't even remember what mine is, but that does sound pretty close.
The
That does
protagonist.
resonate. Yeah. I tend to run
Uh
straight towards conflict.
Enneagram. What's your Enneagram?
I'm a one.
What is a one again?
Believe it's Challenger.
Okay, cool. So, what do you feel like is next for you? Because your son is like 17, you'll probably, be going to college soon or whatever, and you're 5 years into this career. Like, what do you feel like is next for you? Like, what are you excited about? What do you want to pursue for, like, let's say the next decade?
Yeah, well, now that my son is not at home as much, I'm hoping for more travel. I'm hoping to get out more and be able to talk to more businesses, whether it's through my workshops or doing events with businesses. I am still just really geeked out on developing leadership styles and developing leadership acumen. I over and over find that people are put in positions and they just don't feel like they're ready for it. And that
Mm,
imposter syndrome, that insecurity really does come out as ego, really does come out as I've got it all handled because they're just so afraid of people seeing that they don't know what they're really doing. And I find that the more that I can have these great conversations with people, the more that I can spend time developing out their skill set, it's just really, really fun to see the impact of an entire team.
yeah, I mean, what do you feel like would be your dream when it comes to your career? Is it like traveling around doing workshops, all of that? Like, what have you thought about as like an extension to what you're doing right now?
Well, eventually, I'd love to kind of pivot into professional sports and be able to coach leaders in professional sports to be the best that they can be. Again,
That's
I
cool.
find that, the person I look up to as one of the best coaches of all time, Phil Jackson, was very, very
Mm.
intentional with how he showed up on a daily basis. You look at
Yeah,
Popovich over at the Spurs, and there's a handful of others that are like that. And so that's eventually what I would love to do. But the next couple of years, my hope is to continue to be able to impact cultures through executive coaching, the leadership.
awesome. And what are your like favorite books that you've read in the last, couple years that you love to recommend to people in all walks of life?
Um, Yeah, I think I said The Culture Code. That to me is one of the best books. I just love that book on specifically what makes cultures great. Anything by
Hmm.
Simon Sinek, I think, is amazing. I just love his writing style. And I find that every single time I read anything from him, I'm always walking away with some kernels of truth that I can use immediately. And then obviously The Four Agreements by Lin-Manuel is something that I
Yeah,
always recommend because I just find that that is so helpful to be focused on.
yeah, absolutely. Like The Four Agreements, definitely one of my favorite books. And one of those books where just even like years later, like I still remember the contents of it just because it's like it's so real and so profound and all that.
Yeah, and so applicable to every area of life too, I find.
Every area, yeah. And I feel like everything is all interrelated and everything's a reflection of everything else anyway. So anyway, Alita, I have one last question for you. Let's say it's the end of your life and there's nothing for whatever reason, there's nothing to show for it. There's no LinkedIn posts, there's no videos, nothing, there's no books. And you get the however, you have a speakerphone to the world and you get to lead the world with three truths, three things that you know to be true about the world around you. What do you leave the people with? And you can take a minute to think about this if you want.
The first thing that comes up for me is it's all about love, the amount of love that we give and that we receive. The
Hmm.
second thing that comes up for me is everything is a reflection of how we see ourselves. And the third thing that comes up
Hmm.
for me is be more present.
Awesome. Those are all great things, very straight and to the point. Straight and to the point, but you could write a book on each one of them because there's so much to
Agreed.
talk about. Well, Alita, where can the people find you?
You can reach me at my email, aleta@upliftlead.com, or my website, www.upliftingleadership.com.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, Alita, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.